Yeah. So today we have a very special guest today, my dear friend Amy. How's it going, Amy?
Hi, Javi. Happy to be here.
Much love. Thank you for joining us. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what is it that you do, Amy?
Yeah, so I've worked in film marketing for the last 25 years. I've also done TV marketing, both at the studio side and the agency side. But that's where I've sort of earned my stripes is film marketing.
Oh, dope, dope. And could you talk about any of the like previous films that you've worked on? Were you able to do that?
Sure. So I have worked on films like three of the James Bond movies. Where I really started my career was around Legally Blonde. That's where I got a lot of attention, which has been over 20 years ago. Most recently, in the last few years, I worked on Hustlers, the Bad Moms franchise. I've worked on Paranormal Activity, a couple of those movies. I've worked on the Hunger Games. So it's been quite a wild ride, and it's been probably near 300 films that I've marketed over my career.
Oh, that's dope. That's real dope. And how did you get the like what made you go in that field?
You know, it's really interesting. I grew up in the Central Valley, and the jobs that I knew about were like standard jobs like nursing, teaching, that kind of thing. And I was always sort of an ambitious kid, and I thought that I wanted to get into politics
Hmm.
and studied politics in graduate school. And what happened was the recession happened, and I couldn't get a job out of college, out of graduate school. And I basically had to take any job I could get. And it ended up being at an advertising agency, which was not what I thought I wanted to get into, but I needed to pay my bills. And when I was on that, at that agency, worked for like Pedigree Dog Food, their advertising campaign, and AT&T and the California State Lottery. And I ended up really liking it. And I think it's because marketing and advertising is a lot like politics and sports, which is also my past.
Yeah.
Have to sort of understand the psychology of where culture is going. And that piece of it is the balance of like the analytical part plus the cultural, creative, psychology part. And it interested me. And so I started in advertising. And because I was in LA, we had a movie account. And I was sort of the first young advertising kid who raised their hand to work in digital marketing. And I know
Yeah.
that sounds crazy, but when I did it in the 90s, I was like the first person at the agency who figured out how to advertise on your computer and that kind of thing.
So in the '90s, I think I went on the internet once in the '90s. One of my friends showed me, and I was like it wasn't what it is today, right?
No, no,
So
no, no.
what back then there was no Facebook, there wasn't Instagram or anything like that. How did you market back then? Was it just on the sites or?
Yeah, really good question. So a big piece of it has always been search. So back then there was like Yahoo, MSN, Alta Vista, Lycos, About.com. These are like brands you may or may not have heard of, but they were big portal sites. AOL, that was a big one. So what we would do would be basically like big banner ads. And then when you would search like what to do this weekend, we would buy
Mm.
the keywords so that it would be like, come see this movie this weekend, that kind of thing.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. And then we got more creative because like AOL Instant Messenger became a thing. Then we would advertise around that. And MySpace was like the first social network prior to Facebook and all that. And we'd set up movie pages on MySpace. And so it's sort of like each year there was like a dramatic increase of both websites and product that we learned how to sort of leverage to get in front of people. And now the go-tos, of course, are YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, that kind of thing.
So with the MySpace one, right? So you guys knew like to create the pages because I that was a trip because back then you didn't see a lot of marketing. At least I didn't see a lot of marketing on MySpace. What I mainly saw was other people who had larger followings, and they kind of I think they marketed them to kind of
Yeah.
like get Facebook going up. So I remember there was people who would be like, "Oh, that person looks pretty cool. Everybody has him as a friend. I'll go ahead and add him." And then yeah, that's what it. So what made you guys have the foresight to be like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and make a page for this and get people. And how would you get people to follow that page or friend that page back then? I guess it was.
It was easier when it was like an anticipated title,
Hmm.
so if we had a franchise, like a James Bond, for example, that was much easier because you already had invested fanship and you could work directly with like fan voices, which were the original influencers, if you will, and they would sort of promote via their blogs at the time. But there was all sorts of ways you would try to gamify, create scavenger hunts, incentives, first looks to the trailer if you became part of the page. So all of these sort of like tricks of the trade where we still do today. It's just we are applying them to the appropriate site at the time. But driving people to a page and at the time it wasn't as saturated. Like right now, Javi, you yourself being a personality, you have to like understand the mechanics of the algorithm. You have to like post new content constantly. You need to encourage engagement metrics. Back then, it was a little more clean in terms of word of mouth. And if you got a couple people, like you said, who had large followerships, you could create scale pretty quickly because the platforms hadn't sort of engineered these algorithms that you had to sort of trick at the time.
Yeah, yeah, it's true that you basically whoever was the most popular at the time, they could make anything more popular.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So you mentioned you wanted to go into politics. What did you study for? Like when you were in school, what did you study?
So I studied, this is bizarre. I studied literature and I minored in education policy. And my interests at the time were sort of fairness and parity in education, specifically higher education. I was on a few affirmative action committees, and I was really passionate about standardized test scores and those being biased in terms of measuring a student's ability in higher education and therefore, their access to entry. That's where my passion was really at. I thought I would get there through law school. My idea was like I would create sort of a good writing and communications background, go into law school, start to look at policy around education, and then get into lobbying for higher education rights.
Hmm.
And I did work in Washington, D.C., and I did work for the UC's, University of California's federal government relations, and I did some of that work. But it was really impossible at the time to find a job. That's not a large market of employees, and it was more of a very idealistic approach. Nonetheless, though, it gave me a good background in communications. And I think it was a good foundation for marketing, which I end up loving.
How do you connect? How do you connect the two? Like, how would it be how was it a good foundation?
I think that at a basic level, when you're in any type of business, it doesn't matter what it is, entrepreneur, marketing, um, communication is key. And being effective communication, how do you sell something through? How do you influence point of view? And I think when you are studying and in literature, that those are sorts of things that you start to understand, and you just have to have a lot of rigor around your communication. Two, I think that my general interest in politics and sports, what they have going for them is that they're relentless.
Hmm.
Politics, a campaign can spend tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, and on a day, you live or die, right? Versus you're marketing a loaf of bread, you know, that has a different type of shelf life and it has a different type of seasonality. Movies and sports and politics, there's high stakes, there's high money, and you live or die, and it influences millions of dollars that weekend. And there's something about the adrenaline of working in a high stakes industry like that I tended to gravitate towards. It also is a team sport, like marketing, politics, and and marketing and politics and education and sports. They're all teams. They're like, I'm interested in working in collaboration, whereas a lot of people do better working independently.
How do you get that? Because the main point of these conversations is to talk about success, right? And one thing that people often overlook is hardly anyone becomes successful by themselves.
Correct.
Right? Like you're gonna need a team, if not for the moment. It's good to have a long-term team, but if you're not, you're gonna need a team for the moment for that project, right? What do you do to get the team together? Are there any times where you have to take the leadership role, and are there any times we have to fall back and just play your position?
That's a great question. And I 1,000,000% agree that the people that you hold closest in your circle are going to influence your success path as well as your happiness, period. Okay. And so you need to make sure that at a foundational level, there's shared values, there's alignment on your overall goals. And I like to be the dumbest person in the room. So whether or not I'm in a leadership or power position, I want people who are specialists in areas of impact that are critical to, my business goals.
Yeah.
And what that looks like for me now in marketing is I need someone on my team who's very, very much up to speed and an expert in data, crypto, NFTs, gaming, creator economy market. These are all areas that are booming categories that are subsets of marketing that it's almost impossible for me, myself, and I to keep on top of. So I need people who are deep diving and have sort of voracious appetites and curiosity around these areas, and who can extract the finer points that would apply to our business goals, right? Because not everything applies. So I try to set a vision, and I try to set a tone of expectation, and then I try to get out of the way and let people do their jobs.
Yeah, I think that's great, because you don't, like you said, and this is from what I knew too. I worked at Bank of America for years. A lot of the top people, they would revolve, right? Like it was like a revolving. Like you would see people like moving all over the place, right? The people who I seen keep moving up though were those people who one of them, hopefully I can get her on. Actually, she was really intelligent. Her name was Raquel. She told me, you have to get people who are smarter than you, like you said, around you, right? And you have to get them to do what they're best at, just like what you said, and build. That's your team right there, because you don't want to be the person that thinks you know everything, because then you're going to be biting off way more than you can chew. You're going to micromanage, and you're not going to have that happy, that happy workforce, right? You want it to be like a good environment, and a place where people can feel like they can do their job, what they came to do. I think that's a very important part of it too.
It's huge. I mean, if you read the recent reports, they say that people don't leave necessarily for pay. They leave because they don't feel they're valued. So if you can be an effective manager and let people have, access to influence, you recognize their work, you treat them not just as a professional, but as a whole person who has other responsibilities with their family and their own wellness, you're going to retain people a lot longer, and you're going to make them work harder. That's been my experience.
And one thing you brought up earlier that I want to touch on, you saying that the job you have now is where it's similar in politics, is that you have you have to have that drive, right? You have to have that ambition. It's something that's constantly moving, and you have to stay on top of it. What fuels that drive?
That's a good question. Like, I'm the daughter of a coach, and my dad was a coach, and my mom was exceptionally accomplished in academics. And I think it was part of my upbringing to focus on goals and being the best, But I think that as I've aged, I really believe in intentionality and integrity. And as I define myself and who I want to be as I move through life, it's about being excellent in everything I do. And so I'm really of the mindset, when I show up, I need to represent myself with that sort of integrity. But above and beyond that, I'm a single mom with a teenager, and I grew up with pretty sort of meager resources. And so if I don't work out, then there's no one to really fall back on. And I think that all of us are motivated by a combination of sort of like need set and responsibility, and then just like who we want to be, right? How do we show up? And I kind of get a charge when I perform well, whether it's at work or personally. Like that's something to me that gives me a little bit of like a dopamine hit.
Yeah.
And it's kind of how I'm wired.
Now, with every everyone who's successful, what happens is we often see the success, right? So you can see that. What we don't really see, or sometimes, there's the background stuff, right? Like, how stressful is it, and what do you do to deal with that stress when something isn't going the way you wanted it to, or you hoped it would?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I will say is anyone who you perceive as successful, who is sort of an underrepresented person, what you can, know 100% about them is that they're resilient, because that did not come easily, and it came with a lot of cost and sacrifice and often pain. In my situation, not only did I sacrifice a lot of like personal things, whether it was time, relationships, that kind of thing, but I, was unfairly treated when I became an adoptive mom, and I actually had to have a lawyer and filed a lawsuit against my employer because they did things that were illegal. But that wasn't easy, because I was sort of top of my game when that happened, and I had to make a decision that cost me maybe 5 years of my career trajectory, because I felt very principled about it. Additional to that, I've had to take, medical leave for mental health reasons. The pressure became too much a couple times, and I couldn't manage the depression and anxiety, and I wasn't regulating because I was fully in a very stressful job for way too long without sort of balancing out. And I will say that I was not good at managing stress until later in life, until my 40s. And I would say that right now I'm 48, and I would say in the last several years, I've become much better at it, but it's because I know I need to for my health and my happiness.
Yeah.
And for me, that looks like a lot of ritualistic behaviors in the sense of, sleeping regularly, balanced nutrition, moving my body, connecting with loved ones. Like I say ritualistic, but they're really basics of life,
Yeah.
But before, what I would do is I'd work for 4 weeks, and then I might do that once. And then I'd work for 2 months, and then I do it once. And now I integrate it into my life a little more. And it's been tremendous and essential for balancing the stress.
And I know for a lot of younger people, they do see that and they think like, yeah, and it could work to a point, right? Like you can bust your ass to get where you want to get, but at some point you're gonna have to stop. Like you can't keep going at that pace, especially as time goes by, because you're gonna be missing out on a whole lot more as the time goes on.
I think you don't understand what it does to your body. I've been thinking about this for a long time because I grew up as an athlete, and everyone praises you for this idea of time under tension. Like the longer you can endure tension, whether you're in the military, whether you're an athlete, whether you're, a parent, you almost get celebrated that you're able to endure it. But the fact is that puts you in a fight, flight, or freeze response. And that's horrible for your health.
Mhm.
And so being able to be resilient is one thing, but being self-aware enough to know you need to come back to balance at times
Yeah.
is really what we need to celebrate in people.
Yeah. No, I agree. I seen a few interviews of Eminem, right? There people were talking about him, and they said something that really tripped me out. I was like, "Whoa, that's crazy." They said that when he goes in the studio, at least this is what a few people have said. When he goes in the studio, that he treats it like a 9 to 5. He'll take an hour lunch break, and at 5 o'clock he checks out. Even if the song's not done, he says, "I'll be back tomorrow." And they told him like, "Well, why are you leaving?" And he says, "I got to get home to my daughters. I got to do this." And it's because I think he busted his ass in the beginning. He did what he had to do, and it's like he probably realized, look how much time he wasted without his daughters, and so he's not going to go back to that. And I think you're 100% right on that. We have to understand that you can lose a lot while chasing what you think you really want, not understanding that what you want and what you need is right in front of you.
1,000,000%. And that the what's right in front of you can actually make you better in your pursuit of your dream. You know, they're not mutually exclusive. They all fit together if you think about it in that way.
Definitely, definitely. And so now there's a lot of people watching who have like channels or they have different things going on in their life, different like different kind of businesses. Well, what kind of advice would you give them for marketing on a smaller budget?
Well, number one, you are your best product, and you need to really stay authentic and clear about who you are and what you're representing. It's been my experience that sometimes in the pursuit to grow, one can lose their essence of what makes them interesting. And I know, I've talked to you about it and others. Like, I think all of us, wherever we are, have to think about our personal branding and understand that we as a product are the most important thing. I think secondly, you can never underestimate every touch point of interaction. I think small things matter. I think responding to comments, reaching out and, complimenting someone else's work, building sort of tag networks, creating sort of these little aggregated communities that can, from sort of a grassroots level, word of mouth grow, I think is a really, really low touch or low cost way to go about it. And then I would say, like, listen to your fan. Like, what can you learn from your fan? Do they like giveaways? Do they like regularly scheduled programming? Do they want a surprise and delight? Like, what are the things that can keep them sort of locked in and predictable and loyal? I think that there's even surveys that can happen if you're wondering, should I go this way or that way? I see a lot of that, the polling happening. Hey guys, you want to see this next week? I think that's really important, is that active engagement. And then I think like stepping out and hearing and offering yourself as a guest to people that you love and respect, that they may not contact you and be like, hey, I've been a fan of yours forever. I'm growing my scene. I'd love to come on to your show and talk about X, Y, and Z. And just put yourself out there as a guest and sort of offer yourself up. I think getting out of your comfort zone is really important. And then I think, like, if there's a way to slowly and strategically put advertising dollars around lookalikes of fans you already have, target lookalikes, meaning if you can have people who've already signed up for your newsletters or your show, and then scale it by asking each platform, whether it's YouTube or Instagram, build lookalikes against my current fanship. And I think that can happen in the advertising tool, and put, maybe a couple $100 around that. I've heard people be super, super successful in getting exposure and building more community base there. So I think those would be like my first suggestions for people just starting out.
That's dope. That's dope. Thank appreciate that, Amy. And with every when you're successful, the whole point of becoming a success, right? Is to enjoy it. What do you do to enjoy life? What do you do to just to enjoy your time?
Well, you know what, Javi, I'm really fortunate that I love what I do, and I've been able to have people in my life on my team that, whether we were at work or we were, hanging out at, a bar, they're people that I'd enjoy being with. So I don't live for the weekends. I really, really love what I do. And I think that's the trick to life. I know you love what you do too. We all want to grow our influence. We all want to make more money. And I certainly have those dreams. But for me right now, it's about quality time, and it's about, you and I both share a passion for boxing. I love that. But for me, it's about spending time with people that I love. And as I'm at this stage of my life, it's about creating influence around topics that I'm passionate about, like mental health, and the welfare of children, especially as it relates to social media. So those are the two things that I sort of take on outside of my 9 to 5. And I love nature. I camp. I had a little trailer, and for me, it's just that kind of stuff. It's enjoying the small moments,
Yeah,
because I think we often are living to like the big windfall, or like, I'm going to save a few years for this big vacation, or when I hit it big, I'm going to move, or whatever those like big goals are. And we're like, listen, we can make apple cider in the house and throw on some holiday tunes, and that'll be a great memory for the family,
yeah,
and
definitely.
sink into that.
And I remember when I saw you guys one time, you and your team, I tripped out how you guys were able to do that. I was like, wow, that's a great team builder. When I saw you guys at a California Adventure, remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I saw you had the whole team out there, and I was like, that's really cool. And I think you had your daughter with you, if I remember correctly. And it was a great way to merge those, merge, like you said, having that work life, that happiness, family life, merge them all together. I thought that was really dope.
Yeah, here's one thing I'm really conscious of, because I'm near 50, and when I grew up in the business world, I only saw women who were like bitches, who you never heard about their family, or they were over sexualized and leaned into their sort of femininity with men. That's what I saw. And what is very important for me is to demonstrate my humanity and multidimensionality as a woman. And that includes me as a mother, me as a friend, me as just a regular person, and me as a successful businesswoman. But I want other young women to not think that you need to abandon all those other parts of you to be successful.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And it's never too late. It's never. I don't think that you've ever bit off more than you could chew, and there's no turning back. Like, nah, it's sometimes you got to start over. But you mean it's out there, and it doesn't matter where you came from, where you've been. It's the goal. If you got that goal in mind, you can always achieve it. Would you say that's correct?
I think that's really correct. I think that what has helped me is, don't look at your path as a ladder, look at it as a jungle gym.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's going across, sometimes that's down, and sometimes that's up. But all of it means something.
Definitely. We need, it's always good to see more. And I have two daughters, so I definitely want to see more successful women out there, and hope and they're going to be among them. So
Yes, they
yeah.
are.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. Maybe before we wrap it up, is there anything else you wanted to add?
I thank you for doing you, Javier. You're a great example and a constant inspiration and great friend to me. So keep doing you.
I appreciate it, Amy. Thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge. Uh, much love to the Nasty Crew. Much love to all my YA babies. And with that, we out. Peace.